My guest today is my good friend, Mike Olson. He died during a lung transplant and met his donor in heaven. Mike, it's great to have you with us today.
Thanks, Randy. I'm really glad to be here.
Mike, you and I have become good friends through this process. We both have had lung issues and have exchanged stories about our ailment, what caused us to succumb. But tell us what happened. I mean, my goodness, you had this event where you eventually met your donor in heaven.
Yeah, so I had a terminal lung disease called idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, and I developed that in 2014. And it was actually a death sentence because there was no cure for this disease, and it would eventually take my lungs away. My lungs would deteriorate to the point where I couldn't breathe. So I was put on oxygen 24/7. And, that was my life. And I was, really concerned about, what I should do with that situation or that information that was given to me that I had a terminal lung disease. And I kind of made a decision right away. I could be bitter about it, or I could be better and make a difference in the world in which I live. So I decided to just be proactive and to hear from the Lord first, what his take on the whole situation was. Doctors can tell us things about our bodies and our health, but it's ultimately God who is in control. And so I have a chapel in my backyard, and I went there and I said, Lord, okay, this is the information that's been given to me. What do I do here? I've stood in the pulpit as a preacher and preached on signs, wonders, and miracles, preached on healing. And yet I had this lung disease, terminal lung disease, and I was on oxygen. So when I went into my chapel, I just sat there, and then I said, Lord, what do I do? What do you want me to do? How do I deal with this situation that I've been given? And I just heard his voice so clear. And when we hear his voice, he gives us peace. And he said, just trust me. That's all he said. Just trust me. And I was scheduled at that time to go to surgery for an open lung biopsy to really see if, yes, in fact, the doctor made the right diagnosis. And the results came back, and yes, I was terminally ill. And so at that point, I just started trying to be an advocate for other patients, and also just get out in my community with other people who are dying of the disease, and try to help them. As a pastor, realize, we can live in faith and not fear, and that we could, make a difference no matter what we're given in life. We can make a difference with our lives on how we respond, because people are always watching our lives and seeing how we respond to the things, the adversities that come in our way. So,
Yes. So you eventually had to obviously wait for that lung donor, and then you got the call.
Yeah, I waited 5 years on a
Five
transplant list,
years.
and that's a long time.
Wow.
We always think, and I've always preached, that God answers our prayers, and he does, but it's kind of sometimes not in our own timing, right? Or what we wish. And so I waited 5 years, but all during that time of waiting on a transplant list for an organ donor, that whole time I was in perfect peace, and supernaturally the Lord gave me such strength to go out and be a public speaker for lung disease, and to meet with politicians and celebrities to make a difference about this disease. And so, yeah, I waited 5 years on oxygen, very difficult way of life to live. And yet I knew that the Lord said, just trust me. And I had a peace that passes all understanding in my situation, that knowing that he was going to come through one way or another. And I always told my wife, I had three options before me. I could get a supernatural healing, and God does that and still does that today. Or I would die from the disease, or I would get a lung transplant. And so I went to prayer because I had thousands of people praying for me. and believe in God for my situation. And yet it goes back to that still small voice. When you hear God's voice, it'll keep you in peace. And so I asked the Lord, what do I believe for? What is the plan here for this situation? And I heard clear as a bell, you're going to get a transplant. That goes against, to me, everything I preached from the pulpit. God can just supernaturally heal you, and he can. But for me, he chose to get a lung transplant. And I think his ways are higher than our ways, his thoughts than our thoughts. So I said, okay, Lord, I will agree that there's a pair of lungs out there that'll fit my body and that will eradicate the disease that was destroying my lungs. So 5 years, and then I got the call. So and what happened was, we were waiting on that phone call, and so I was actually out in my art cabin where I was doing some folk art, and I heard the Lord again, his voice clearly saying, hey, put up all these art supplies. You're not going to have time for this. I thought that was kind of weird, like, why is he telling me something like normal, things that we do in our daily life, whether we're working or playing or doing whatever. And he said, put all that stuff up. So I said, okay, Lord. So I boxed it all up, and I thought, that's really strange. And I walked back to the house, and the phone rings, and my wife says, it's the transplant center. The doctor wants to talk to you. And so sure enough, we got on the phone and said, we have a match. We found a set of lungs, and you need to come in right away. So off to the hospital we went, packed, had a little to-go bag packed. For 5 years, I had a to-go bag packed. So always being ready for whatever, whenever I'd get that call. So we went off to the hospital, and they had to prep me, and the donor lungs, the person who died was actually being kept alive, until the transplant took place. And, so there was like a lot of time in between waiting. And so they prepped me, and then I was in the hospital, and that next morning is when the transplant took place. So.
So this was obviously a tragedy that ended this young man's life. And
Yes.
you are now on the operating room table, and
right.
Your lungs are removed. And during the procedure, something happened that just absolutely is incredible. And that would be an understatement as to what happened. So take us Mike, to that place.
Okay. So I remember them. I was going into this elevator and going down into the OR department, and I hadn't gotten any medications yet, and so they wheeled me in and then put the mask on for the anesthesia, and that's the last thing I knew in the natural. But as I was on the table and they were operating, it's a long surgery. It's a 12-hour surgery, so it was a long process. And so as they were operating, and as they were, what happens was they hook you up to a heart and lung machine, and the machine breathes for you because your lungs are being removed. And so at that point, they had gotten the new lungs in, and they thought everything was, going according to plan. But obviously there was a problem. And I was on the table, and all of a sudden I felt myself lifting off the table, out of my body. And I thought, wow, this is weird. And you can see the doctors working on you. And so anyway, I started coming off the table, levitating off, going up off the operating table. And all of a sudden I see these swirling lights swirling all around me, like rainbow color, just myriads of these lights, swirling. And all of a sudden I looked, and I hear these voices, beautiful singing voice in there. And they started to say, Mike's coming home. And I was like, wow, and I'm such a jokester in my life with people. So to myself, I thought, well, at least I'm going up. you know, I just, I thought to myself, I had my sense of humor still. And I was like, at least I'm going up. But right before that happened, though, I hear these negative voices, as I was lifting off the table. And they were saying, who do you think you are? You're not going up. Who do you think you are? And just taunting me. And I realized, oh, I know what that voice is. And that's the voice of the enemy. And so I stopped it right away. I said, in the name of Jesus, shut up. You can't talk to me that way. I'm a child of the living God. And when I took authority over that, those voices silenced. No, there was no more voices speaking at that point. And then the angels were singing, and Mike's coming home. And then there was like an interruption in that beautiful scene where where I heard the Lord say, no, he's just here for a visit. And all of a sudden I was like, whoosh, up into heaven. There was like bright white light as far as the eye can see. And I was like, oh my goodness. I mean, like, I am dead. I mean, this was unexpected. I went in for a double lung transplant, and here I am in heaven. And the first thought that came to my mind when I was there, well, it was like a life review. And I couldn't think of anything I did bad, because that's one thing I was worried about, even as a Christian, even as a pastor, right? I was like, we screw up. We're humans. We don't have it all together all the time. And so I'm standing there in heaven, and I get this like epiphany that comes over me. Like, it's like I didn't know this, right? So I get this epiphany. It's all Jesus. And I actually could feel every molecule, every substance that was in heaven. It was like pulsating Jesus. And it was like, oh my goodness, I couldn't remember any of my sins. Like a blackboard had erased everything I've ever done wrong. And I realized I was in total bliss, total peace. It's just standing there. And it was like I was bathed in light from the top of my head to the soles of my feet. And I looked at myself, and I was just full of light. And I was like standing there going, wow. And then all of a sudden I thought, wait a second, someone died so that I can receive these new lungs. I just thought about my donor, and I thought, wow, he really, well, I was just thinking, they died so I can live. I'm so grateful. So I just I thought I shouted it out, but in heaven, it's not like you talk. It's almost like your whole spirit being talks. And I just said, I want to thank my donor. As soon as I said that, it was like I felt a presence behind me, and I looked behind me, and there was Jesus and the donor standing there. And I looked, and the donor, it was really interesting because I was trying to take it all in. And the donor was like, he had his head down, not in shame, but what I perceived is he was like, this isn't about me, please. I signed my organ donor card because I wanted someone else to live, to use my organs to be able to continue life. And so the focus was really Jesus. And so all of a sudden I felt Jesus put his hand on my left shoulder, and he said, Mike, these are your new lungs. Receive them. And I said, yes, Lord. And as soon as I agreed with heaven, as soon as I agreed with the word of the Lord to me, it was like, whoosh, I was back into my body. I was back in the OR. And what's interesting about this was that my wife was home during the surgery. And what happened was that how I died was the doctor took the clamp off too early, and I bled out. And so that's what caused the death. When I read my doctor report months later, it was right there. Patient died, needed to be resuscitated. And so I read it right there from the doctor's notes. He bled out profusely. And so that's why I died on the table. But, it's interesting because my wife was home at the same time because they were going to call her midway and then after the surgery was over. And anyway, she was home and I had a bunch of oxygen tanks that I used, daily. And we had them stored on the front porch. And all of a sudden, one of the oxygen tanks falls down, boing. And my wife wakes up. She calls the transplant center. Mike, oh, he's in surgery for transplant. So at that time she had called and they said 1 lung in, so God was even telling her step by step everything I was going through.
Wow.
So anyway, she found out. She went to the hospital after that, and the transplant was successful in the way I did get a set of new lungs. And she asked the doctor, so what are all these machines he's hooked up to? What is going on? And they said he died. Mike died. We had to bring him back. It was, pretty violent, and try to get him to come back to life. And he's hooked up to heart and lung machine, and he's in a coma right now. So I was in a coma for 10 days. Interesting though, God knows every detail, right? So while I was in the coma, the day I died on the table, I had a friend lived across town, and he got woken up with an audible voice in his bedroom because he had been praying for me. And the voice said, Mike's with me. Well, he was devastated. He was like, what do you mean, Lord, Mike's with you? Well, he didn't know what to say. And he didn't want to call my wife and say, your husband died. So he kept it to himself. And then a few days later, when I was hooked up to the heart and lung machine, because all my saturation levels were down, everything, I was not breathing on my own. The machine was doing it for me. And so he gets woken up again, my friend Jonathan, and this time the audible voice of God in his bedroom said, he's back and he's going to be okay. So then he calls my wife on the phone and says, this is what happened. I don't understand it. I don't know why I get messages from God for Mike, but this is what happened. So interesting. I'm in a coma. I can't tell my wife, hey, I went to heaven. I met my donor. So she's sitting there at home and I'm in a coma, and she's sitting on the couch talking to her sister because they were doing some cleaning and preparation for me to come home. And all of a sudden my wife just sits there and goes, oh my goodness. And her sister Kay says, what? She goes, something came over me. Mike went to heaven and got to thank his donor. She says, I don't even know how I know that. And so her sister said,
so she just knew that the Lord had told her that you were going to meet your donor in heaven.
And so she's like, I can't wait till he gets out of this coma so I can ask him if that happened. So I have a friend, Jeff, who's a doubting Thomas, and he goes, Patty, when you go to the hospital, I want to go with you. So they come into the ICU, and it was 10 days later. They had a trouble extubating the tube out of my throat because it was in there so long. So that day they were going to take the tube out finally, and I was going to breathe on my own. And so Jeff comes bounding into the ICU. He goes, I'm going to go in there first, Patty. So he goes in and he goes, I'm like coming out of this. The tube just got out of my throat. I'm talking like 3 octaves lower, like So Jeff goes, Mike, when you were out there in the Netherlands, like, did you experience anything? And in my groggy voice and my, trying to talk for the first time, I said, yeah, I died and went to heaven. I got to thank my donor. Well, his eyes got big as, really big, and turns to Patty, and Patty's like, wow, I knew that. And they start dancing around the ICU because the Lord had already told her.
So he had heard also from the Lord that you had gone to heaven and met your donor. So Mike, I've got to ask you this question because you met the angels in heaven against a rainbow backdrop. And then something happened to you when you were discharged from the hospital after being in a coma, where you saw an angel again. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So I was wondering, when I saw those swirling rainbow lights, angels swirling all around me when I was coming off the operating table when I died. When I got home, I kind of looked it up and I thought, I always try to confirm things with the word. And in Revelations, it says, and I saw an angel with a rainbow over its head. And I realized they do exist. But anyway, I had come home from the hospital and I was in my bedroom, and it was kind of a lot to take in to get used to take on a lot of medicines, anti-rejection medicines, and just being home alone because my wife had to go back to work. And so I'm in my bedroom laying in the bed, and all of a sudden I was thinking about heaven. Anytime I talk about this experience, it kind of manifests all over. The same feelings I had when I was in heaven when I talk about this experience comes. So I was in my bedroom, and all of a sudden this angel appears, like from the floor to the ceiling. It was a huge angel and just staring at me. And I looked, and then it disappeared. And I said, Lord, what was that? And he said, those angels are still watching after you, Mike. And I just realized, wow, it's not only that I saw them in heaven. He brings one into my bedroom when I'm recuperating from double lung transplant. And I thought, this is an awesome God who manifest themselves in signs, wonders, and miracles in everyone's lives. And we need to be expecting more like that. We read it in the New Testament. Angels appeared all the time and spoke to people and escorted them places. And so it should be our natural, supernatural experience as Christians. So
I love that, Mike. And I love the fact that when you were in heaven, and this is something I can empathize with, that your attention was on Jesus, and everyone around was telling you or encouraging you to stay focused on that. But you didn't have to be told, did you? Because you were immersed in the presence of Jesus. And then he sends you an angel to confirm again, and that during this entire time that the Lord was expressing to you the need to trust him.
Yes.
Which is not
to send it
natural.
And to send an angel like that, why? Because he loves us. He wants to know, he wants all of us to know, I have myriads of angels that are continually available. It says that angels are sent to minister to those who are heirs of salvation. That's you and I.
Yes.
And they have, I tell everyone, I keep my angels busy. Seriously. I mean,
you do.
I've had 60 surgeries on my bronchial tubes in the past 3 years, and I just go, "Come on, guys, we're going for another adventure here. I need your help." And I really rely on the heavenly messengers that God sends to guide the surgeon's hands to make sure I get the proper medicine, that things don't go awry, and so God says, "Call upon me, and I'll answer you."
Were you that way before you had your encounter in heaven, Mike? Were you this trusting that you could go through 63 surgeries and say, let's go angels,
Yeah. Well, I kind of was a wild worshiper, and it was really interesting because my last pastorate, I was an Anglican priest. Can you imagine wearing robes, had a collar on, and they called me the dancing priest,
so you were a charismatic Anglican
I was charismatic Anglican church. I'm a married priest. And yes, people would
you were an oxymoron, as they say.
Yeah. And people would walk in and say, they were expecting, liturgy, but we would be raising our hands. We'd be worshiping the Lord. We'd be dancing before the Lord. And, I just always had that freedom in my life. And, ever since the Lord touched me and saved me and filled me with the Spirit, it's always been that way. But it's been a more deeper way after my experience in heaven. I can't describe it, but it's just like, I tell everybody, I'm just chill, it doesn't matter. Wow. What happens, people are all focused on what's going on in the world right now. And it's like, you know what, if you would know how powerful your God is and how wonderful Jesus is and how much he wants to incorporate heaven into your life. Just receive what he has.
Wowza. One last question, a quick one, Mike, and that is, have you ever met the family of your donor here in this world?
No, but we are told to write letters to our donor family through the Transplant Center. And so I have written, and they have received the letter that I just basically told them I'm grateful. But I was not able to share that I had died and met their loved one. So it's my prayer that someday soon I would be able to meet the donor family. Wow. And encourage them to say, hey, your loved one was in heaven. And what they did as a gift to me, I'm alive because of that.
You met your donor in heaven. Yeah. And that just is an incredible revelation. As we wrap this up, Mike, when you came away from this experience now, and obviously you have some lung issues going on currently, and you look back on this, what do you think the Lord was telling you in terms of your experience in meeting your lung donor that you might want to communicate to our audience?
Well, I think I reiterated earlier, is that God knows every detail of our life, every situation that's going to come into our life. It's already mapped out. He knows what's going to happen. He knows the circumstances we're going to face. And isn't it just like God to speak to other people into our lives to confirm what we've experienced, because he's a loving God. And he wants you to know it's going to be okay. What you're going through you're going to be okay. You're going to come out the other side. And that's what I learned, even when I was in heaven for that brief time. I learned, when I was standing there waiting and collecting my thoughts, is that we worry about way too many things here on the earth, whether it's our finances or spouses, or anything. And in the light of eternity, this is such a short little visit here. It may seem like long. It may seem long if you're suffering or in pain, but God knows all about it, and he sends his angels.
That's a very poignant word, and that deserves a praise the Lord, Mike, because our guests come back from heaven oftentimes with a message for those who are living today.
Yes.
So the message for those who are in Yeshua, Christ the Lord, is this: be of good cheer, because heaven is in your future. Thank you again, Mike, for joining us today. And take care. God bless. Until next time. Thank you for watching this episode of Heaven Encounters. If you'd like more information, you can go to Randy K Ministries at randyk.org. Take care and God bless.